Hey guys, it's good to have you with us. I apologize for this being recorded, not live, as we usually do on Monday nights. As you know, if you were here yesterday for church, we were out of town. We left yesterday or Sunday afternoon, but yesterday afternoon for you. It's tomorrow for me right now. We're going to Kentucky for Paula's father's funeral. So we'll be traveling during the time, or we'll be busy with that family things during the time of our lessons here. That's why we're not doing the Zoom class. That's why I'm doing it this way. But again, as we go through this class, if you have any questions, let me know. You can text message me. You can text message Paula. However you need to get in touch with us. We're glad to help you out. And glad to answer any questions you have. And that's what this class is for, is to help this. As I said a few weeks ago, we're starting to study about the life of Christ. We're going to look at the book of Mark. And one thing that was asked of me last week, or 2 weeks ago now, that after we got through, was what do we know about Jesus' early life? What do we know about him after his birth? We know we said last week or 2 weeks ago, last class, that we know about his birth from Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 1 and 2. We know about that first birth, about his being born in the manger, the wise men coming to him, and those things. We can spend some time talking about that, but for our class, we're not right now. Then the only other thing we know about his childhood is to age 12, when he is taken to Jerusalem and he chooses to stay while his parents go home. And he does that because at age 12, a Jewish boy was considered a man. So he seems to take that man position of being in Jerusalem to stay there, but his mother and daddy come find him and tell him to come home, and he does. He obeys them. And so, although we don't know a whole lot about Jesus' early life, what we do know is that life is an example. He lived that perfect life. He lived that obedient child even at that age. And that sort of sets up the story we're looking at now in looking at Mark. You remember we talked about Mark. Mark is the gospel of action. Mark was one of the followers of one of the later disciples of Jesus, not while he was alive, but remember the church. We would know because I think when Jesus was alive, Mark was very young. And we may talk a little bit about Mark when we get toward the end of this book. But Mark was later recorded the gospel accounts, or the gospel account of Mark, based on Peter's gospel, based on what Peter preached. And so this is what Peter preached. And what's telling to me about this is that early life is not as valuable, not as key to our understanding who Christ is and what he did, because we're not told about it. If they wanted us to know, as we're told in other places, if we need to know about it, God would have told us about it. So what this does, it doesn't tell us much about his childhood, but it tells us that what kind of a child he was. He was a faithful child, and he was an obedient child. And that sort of leads into what we talked about last week, where we see Jesus going to John to be baptized. That's what we talked about last class, was Jesus going to John to be baptized. Then you remember he was tempted in the desert. Then from there he goes and calls 4 fishermen to come and follow him. And that's where we pick back up tonight, is looking at this story, this account, after Jesus has called these 4 fishermen to him. We begin tonight in verse 21. Now, before we read this, I want to notice something about these verses. Verse 21, the very first few words say, and they went into Capernaum. Now, you don't know much about Capernaum. This will be about like me telling you about what I know about my hometown. I could talk to you about Rogersville and Anderson and Elgin and Town Creek, cities that are near where I grew up, but they don't mean a whole lot to you. But if I talk about somewhere like Florence, you may recognize that because you may have been to Florence, but the little towns you've not been through. And so when we talk about the Bible story, I want us to know these places. And what we're going to do, we're going to look here at a map. Now, this is a map of Palestine. This is a map of the area where Jesus lived. And you'll notice a few things here. Let me get my marker here on my computer. You'll notice right where that red dot is, that is Jerusalem. This is where the temple and everything is. If you take this dot, you follow it up here to this red circle, you'll notice that where my dot is now is Nazareth. You'll see this red area here is Galilee. Right here is Samaria. And then right here on this bottom region is Judea. These are the 3 major countries we're going to be talking about, 3 major areas we're going to be talking about as we look at the life of Christ. And for now, we're going to zoom in to where this place of this circle is, and that is to look at the place where Jesus is talking about. You notice it talked about that he was in Capernaum. Capernaum is a city designated by the area. Here's the Sea of Galilee. This was a major sea of their time. The Jordan River flows into it, and then the Jordan River flows out of it. And then if you look at it, we go back a slide maybe, you'll see the Jordan River will actually flow right in between all these down to the Dead Sea. And so this is where Jesus is at. Now, this is where Jesus has come and called his disciples. We're going to see that John and Peter, James and John and Peter and Andrew all live in Capernaum. That's where their fishing operation is. That's right by the seaside. We're going to see some other places. Jesus will spend a lot of his time around the Sea of Galilee. You'll notice Nazareth. I showed you a minute ago where Nazareth was. This is where Jesus grew up, was over in this area. And so here Jesus has left Nazareth, and he has come over here to Capernaum. He's come over here to the Sea of Galilee. And this is going to be where we're at. Now, we're going to notice in most of Jesus' life, he's going to be based upon Capernaum, or most of his ministry is based in Capernaum in Israel, and Jerusalem, And so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a city that's right on the edge of the seashore. And so as we look at this city on the seashore, we go back to our verses. This is beginning in verse 21. And in verse 21, it says, let me get my marker going. It says, and they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished at his teachings, for he taught as one who had authority, and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, before we finish this story and go to the next verse, I want you to notice some things about these verses. Notice again, Jesus is going to Capernaum. They're told again the word immediately on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was the seventh day, Saturday, the day of rest, the day the Jews were commanded to gather to worship. And what happens is Jesus calls his disciples on one Sabbath. Then the next Sabbath, he comes and he goes into a synagogue. Now, a synagogue was very similar to a church building in that it was a place where people gathered. You see, the Jews would worship in the temple at Jerusalem. That was their major place of worship, and they would have to go there 3 times a year for 3 major feasts, at least 3. Some of them may not have went that much. But one of the places you would go is on the Sabbath, you would go to a synagogue. A synagogue means a place of dwell, or a place of gathering, to come together. And so a synagogue was a place in a city where the Jews would get together to worship. And they would have someone who would read, and they would have usually some kind of singing, sort of similar, maybe similar to what we had, more chanting than our singing. And they would have people come in. If they had someone traveling through who was a teacher, they would let them teach. And so Jesus comes in on the synagogue, and he comes in, and they ask him to teach. And he knows, verse 22, he begins to teach, and he teaches in such a way that he astonishes them. The people are amazed at his teaching because he teaches unlike anyone else they had. Now, the difference between Jesus' teaching and that of the scribes mentioned earlier or later is that Jesus taught as one who had authority. Typically, the scribes, and a scribe was a person whose entire job, whose entire meaning, their whole behavior was to copy Scripture. Their job was to write out Scripture. Scribes, they would literally sit and copy one passage of Scripture into something else. Because then, again, in their time, you didn't have computers, you didn't have telephones, you didn't have printers, you didn't have typewriters, didn't have any of that stuff. And the only way then you have a printing press. The only way to make a copy of something was to sit down and handwrite it. And a scribe was a very valuable job because they would have to sit down and copy it verbatim. And to show you how tedious this is, we've all played the game telephone, where we start one word over here, and you pass the sentence around till it gets to the end, and you try to tell what it said, and we all laugh because it's something totally different at the end. Well, that's because we can't get a simple sentence straight. Imagine if the trying to do the Bible that way. They're trying to teach all of God's Word and it being passed from person to person to person, and what they may change. These scribes were key in that they made sure that the Word didn't change. They would be so meticulous that they would have a number. What they would do is they would sit down with their scribe, their scroll, their book, and they would check it. And the way they would check it is they would say, okay, go to column 3, line 12, letter 15. And they would go down to that that column, they'd go down to that line, they would go over 15 letters, and they would check what that letter was. And if that letter and that column and that line and that point wasn't the exact letter of the original, they would throw it away. No matter how much time they had spent, they made sure it was verbatim and very meticulous. But part of the thing was these guys would copy a scripture, and they not just copy scripture, they also copy other people's teachings, especially older rabbis, older teachers of the Jews. And what they would do is these scribes would teach not their own style or their own thing. They would basically reteach what someone else had taught. And so Jesus comes on the scene, and when Jesus comes on the scene, he teaches in a way that's totally different. He teaches in a way that's unlike this. Not that he's teaching what someone else has said or what someone else has taught and said this is what we need to do, but he's teaching in a way that is speaking of his own authority. He tells them what the word means, not what some old rabbi said. And so when the people hear this, they were amazed by it. They're astonished, as the verse says here. And they're just soaking it up. And then you notice the next verse, in their synagogue was an unclean spirit. Now, this is something that we're going to see in the Gospels that happens, is these unclean spirits or demons. Exactly what this was, we don't know. What a demon is what's believed to be a fallen angel. You'll remember the story of the Bible that we talk about Satan, and he falls from heaven because he rebels against God. But when he rebels against God, there are angels who side with Satan. And those angels who side with Satan are cast down out of heaven as well as Satan, awaiting the judgment day, awaiting for heaven and hell, that punishment in hell where they're going to be chained for eternity. And so these fallen angels have typically been described as being these demons. And exactly how these work with people, we don't know. But there was something that happens at this time, and some people think, and I believe this may be, that these demons come about, not that they were something that came about usually or typically, but these demons came about, especially at this time, to prove the authority of Christ. Because this was not something you could cure with medicine or cure with treatment. This was something that required authority. And no one else had this authority that God had, that Christ had. And this tells us a little bit about these demons in that they are beings that recognize who Christ is. Because look at verse 24. When they speak to Jesus, they ask him, "What are you going to do with us? What are you doing? Why are you here?" And then you notice this: if you come to destroy us, again, there's that known prophecy, a known idea that they're going to be destroyed one day. And this demon is asking, "Is that what you're doing now? Are you here to destroy us, to get rid of us?" And then the last part, the demon says, "I know who you are. I know you're the Holy One of God." And so what we have here is what we'll see in the Gospels is interesting, is the demons are some of the first ones to recognize and say, "We know you're the Son of God. We know you're the Messiah. We know who you are and where you come from." And what's interesting about this is that Jesus in the next verse, in verse 26, rebukes him. Verse 25, Jesus rebukes him, and this is what he says: "Be silent and come out of him." An unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Now notice Jesus rebukes the demon, tells him to be quiet. Come out of him and be quiet. Well, why? Well, why does Jesus tell this demon to be out? Because is the demon telling a lie? No, because he is the Son of God. He is the Holy One, come to God. So why does the demon tell him to be quiet? Or why does Jesus tell the demon to be quiet? Well, Jesus wants the people to come to see him, to know him, for his teaching, for the good, not because they hear a demon saying it. And that's just something we're going to see throughout the gospel accounts. These demons are going to try to reveal who Jesus is. And again, trying to get the negative attention on Jesus that he can have this. And that this is revealed through negative ways. But Jesus is going to say, "No, be quiet, don't speak." And he's going to do this many times. Tell the demon possessed, "Don't speak, don't tell who I am, but leave him." And again, you get verse 26, this convulsing and crying out, this demon possession, whatever it was not a pleasant sight. And it was something that was noticeable. And something that not just, like I said earlier, the typical medicine could heal, the typical medicine could make better. And so to see this happen is an amazing thing. And you notice just how quickly this comes out. Now, again, some people today still try to say there's demon possession and there's all these different exorcism things to do this. That's not the case. Demon possession seems to have ended because, again, we have no way to combat it. Whatever this is, it wasn't typical. Those who claim to have those ways today, they don't work, and we'll see that coming up in Halloween, that people start talking that kind of thing. But this was something that is only associated with the time of Jesus. And shortly thereafter, in the book of Acts, we'll see some demon possession. But the demon possession seems to have ended in that Satan and his power sort of reigned in. But no matter what, there's a big show about this demon coming out and crying out and convulsing this man. And the demons would do this when they possess someone. It was not a pleasant sight to see them take a hold. And so when all the people see this, they're amazed again. They're amazed, one, at his teaching, and two, they're amazed at what he does. And they begin to say, what is this? Who is this man? He gives this new authority. He teaches. He gives a new teaching with authority. He preaches and teaches of his own word, not of what someone else says, what someone thinks, but he speaks with authority. And then not only that, they say the evil, unclean spirits obey him. And so what happens is that Jesus is seen here because of his miracles. And in verse 28, and at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region. So what we're going to see here is that what happens for Jesus is not what Jesus necessarily wants. And that is that Jesus is becoming known and Jesus is becoming followed because of his healings, because of his because of what he's able to do rather than what he is trying to teach. And we're going to see that's what Jesus is seeking. That's what Jesus is wanting to do, is to teach people, wanting people to come to him, not because they see him cast out a demon, but because they hear his truth. And so what happens here is Jesus casts out this demon. There's a big show at the synagogue. And so Jesus leaves. Verse 29, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. These are the four fishermen he calls. He goes apparently to a house just right down the road, close by. In verse 30, Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Now, they leave the synagogue where they've gathered together. They enter into the house of Simon and Andrew. Again, this tells us that Simon and Andrew and James and John were all based in Capernaum. This is where their fishing operation was. This is where they lived. And Jesus comes into their house, and in Simon's house is his mother-in-law. Now this reveals something to us that we're not really ever introduced to, but we see here that apparently Peter had a wife. He had a wife, and we're told in 1 Corinthians, I believe, 9, or maybe 2 Corinthians 9, that Peter had a wife who traveled with him. She went with him when he went preaching. So, we always hear about Peter, but Peter had a wife who went with him. And here her mother is sick, deathly sick. She lay with this fever, and she is in the bed, and again, the diagnosis here is not good, that she's not doing well at all, and so they tell Jesus about her, and when they tell Jesus about her, Jesus goes in to see her. When Jesus goes in, he took her by the hand. So here you have this very sick woman laying on the bed with a fever, probably getting close to death's door maybe, about how severe it is. Again, we assume it to be severe, but we don't know. But anyway, he takes her by the hand and he heals her. He picks her up and the fever leaves her. And then we see a part of Jesus' healing. Notice the very last few words, and she began to serve them. Now, this is something about Jesus' healings we're going to see in biblical healings, biblical miracles that we're going to see when there's healings, and that is that the healing happens immediately. Now, where this is key is today, some people today still claim to be able to heal and miracle workers and so forth and so on. But if you watch them and listen to them, they'll do their little show to say they've healed someone, but yet they'll say it takes time. They'll talk about someone's back pain, and usually when they try to heal someone, it's someone who has an ailment you can't see, like a neck pain or a back pain or a leg pain or some internal problem that you can't see right then. And this is not the case of Jesus. Jesus heals things that you can see are healed immediately, visibly healing them. And we'll talk about more about that in just a second. But Jesus comes and takes her by the hand. And then notice this healing is immediate because she's able to serve them. Now think about this. Think about the last time time you were sick. The last time you were sick with a fever, you had a severe cold, or maybe you had the flu, or none of us have had the coronavirus, but imagine how you'd feel like that. After you've had a major illness, a major sickness, what happens? Well, when you get over that and you're finally healed, or you're no longer got a temperature and everything's calmed down, you're usually exhausted. You spend days, and we typically spend days resting and recuperating after we've had this sickness. But notice this woman, is Jesus heals her, and immediately she gets up and begins to serve them. Well, why? Because Jesus didn't use a natural healing. Jesus had a supernatural. And Jesus' healing took place so quickly, so fastly, that there was no delay. And we're going to see when there was a delay, he was teaching something. And so he picks her up, and her fever leaves her. And as soon as her fever leaves her, she begins to serve. She begins to take care of those people around her. So this is what we see in the story of Simon's mother-in-law. And he knows verse 32. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Now, you'll notice it says that evening. Now, we may think, now, wait a minute, why didn't they, if someone came to our church tomorrow morning and they started healing people on the spot and they began to cast out demons where we could visibly see people before and after, we would be saying, hey, we'll bring if we know they're going to a hotel down the road, we would bring people that afternoon. We wouldn't wait till that night. Why did they wait till that night? Well, they waited till that night because it was the Sabbath. And you'll remember the Sabbath, if you remember that, the Sabbath was a day of rest. And what happens is that during the day of rest, you're not supposed to go anywhere, not supposed to travel far, not supposed to cook, not supposed to work. You're supposed to take it easy and spend the day remembering God. Now, you may say, no, wait a minute, this is evening. Why are they doing on evening on this at the Sabbath? Well, the reason that they do this on the evening and this doesn't break the Sabbath is because the Jews did time differently than we do. You know, our day begins and ends at midnight, middle of the night. And if not, and typically in our minds, we think about the day. We think about today as being the day, like when you watch this, be hopefully Monday, and then Monday night, and then followed by Tuesday. In the Jewish mindset, they changed that. They began by what Genesis 1 talks about, where it says there was evening and there was day, the first day. They go by their days by the night being the day before. So here's what happens on when you're watching this on Monday. Monday night in their time would be Sunday night to us. At Sunday night at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m., it becomes Monday to them. And that Monday goes from 6 p.m. our Sunday night into 6 p.m. Monday night. So probably when you're watching this after 7 o'clock, you're technically, if you were a Jew in the ancient time, this would be Tuesday to you. We'd already be in Tuesday. So what happens is, and they do 6 o'clock because that's sundown. That's when the sun goes down. That's when the day changes there. And so that's that's how their days went. So what happens here is they wait till sundown. They go our Saturday night, is still Saturday in our reckoning of time, but after them it's after 6 o'clock, and they bring all these people to Jesus. And again, it's not just some, it's all of them. They bring him all the sick and all those who are oppressed by demons. Now, I want you to notice the distinction here over and over again, that the demons are not sickness. The demons are not some other way of talking about some kind of physical sickness or physical disease. They are listed as two separate entities. There are the sick, and then there's who demon possessed, those who have unclean spirits, those who are oppressed by demons. And so they bring Jesus these sick, and he begins to heal them. Notice verse 34. He healed those who are sick, many who are sick with various diseases. Again, from simple everyday aches and pains probably, to people who had major issues, major problems. Jesus was able to heal them. And he was able to cast out the demons. But again, notice when he cast out the demons, he would not permit the demons to speak. He wouldn't let the demons talk because they would acknowledge him. They would call him the Son of God. And again, remember, Jesus doesn't want to be known as the Son of God because of the demons. He wants his people to realize that. As a matter of fact, we're going to see later on that when Jesus' disciples, it takes them a while to figure out who he is and to acknowledge that. When Simon Peter will make that confession that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus will go on and tell his apostles, look, don't tell anybody who I am until after the resurrection. Now, they didn't understand what the resurrection was, but he's going to tell them, don't tell anybody who I am until after the resurrection, till they see the proof, till they see what has come about later. And so this is why Jesus doesn't want people to follow him because of demons. They want people to hear his truth, to hear his disciples, hear his followers, proclamations, hear their saying of what Jesus is, hear his gospel and believe it, not be coerced by demons who are scaring them. And so Jesus begins to heal and he takes care of the people. And then we get to the next verse, verse 35. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, let's go on to the next town, so that I may preach there also. That is why I came out. And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in the synagogue and casting out demons. Now, notice this. This is a very important part of Jesus. In the early morning, before anyone else is up, while it's still dark. Now, remember, people came to Jesus late into the night. But yet, early next morning, Jesus goes out and he prays. He goes out into a desolate place. He goes by himself to pray. Now, this teaches us something about prayer. This teaches us not necessarily that we have to pray in the morning, but we need to make sure we can find a place that's just us. Jesus had all these people around him. He had his apostles around him, his disciples, these early followers, his Peter's family. He has the people from the city, but yet he's able to get out, and they leave. They probably tell everybody to leave there in the night. He gets up early in the morning and gets out without bothering anybody, and he goes to a place, a desolate place, a deserted place, a place away from everybody where nobody can bother him, and he prays. And the implication is in verse 36 that it takes Simon and Andrew and James and John a little while to find him. They have to look for him, and they search, and they finally found him and tell him, hey, everybody's looking for you. Basically what they're saying is, hey, the people are lined up at Simon Peter's going to say, the people are lined up at my house again. The people have went and they brought over all their sick, and they're ready for you to heal them. You're popular. You're a movie star. What you say? You're famous. They want to come see you because everybody wants to be healed by you. And then Jesus in verse 38 says something very interesting to them, in that he says, let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out. Notice what Jesus says here. The people come to Jesus to heal their sickness, to heal their demons, but Jesus says, that's not my goal. That's not my mission. That's not my job. This tells us about Jesus. Notice he says, I came to preach. He says, let me go to the next town. Let me go to the next place. Let's travel from here and let's go there so that I can preach. So that I can preach the good news, preach the gospel there. He says, for this is why I came out. This is why I came to earth. This is why I began my ministry, was to teach and to preach, not just to heal. But then verse 39, when he went out, he went through all the area of Judea, preaching everywhere he went, and preaching in the synagogues every Sabbath when they would gather together. And as he was there, he had cast out demons. Well, why did Jesus do this? Why does Jesus heal? If he just says here, my ministry is to preach, my goal is to preach, not heal, why does Jesus heal at all? Well, he does that to prove a point. He does that to prove a point. Imagine someone came to us, again, Sunday morning, and they come and preach to us, and they told us that God has changed off his teaching. God has devised a new system, that God is going to change. We're no longer saved by Christ, but God sent his nephew, his nephew to save us. And we'd laugh at him and say, you're crazy. The Bible says this, and this. But what if that very same guy come up here and he said, no, I'm telling you, God has changed his plan, and here's my proof. And he brings someone up there who's missing an arm. Someone whose arm is missing, has been cut off. And he stands up there and he heals them. He says a prayer over them, he touches them, and you see that hand form back. Or he takes someone whose hand is all withered up and closed up and from a stroke or for something like that, and he touches it and it comes back and it comes fully healed again. You're going to see that and you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, what is this guy saying? I may not understand what he's saying, but I see what he's doing, and I'm impressed. How is he able to do this? This is what Jesus does. Jesus does the miracles to prove who he is. He heals people, so people say, hey, how is he able to do this? Not everybody's able to do this. Well, he's able to do this because he's got the special power. because he's got the power of God. He's got the blessing of God. He's got the ministry of God. And this is Jesus' ministry. And as he goes out from there, one last encounter here in the book of Mark 1, and then we'll be done for tonight. Beginning in verse 40. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, If you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I will, be clean, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Now, a leper comes through. Now, what is a leper? A leper could be a lot of different things. Leprosy in the Bible is a description for a lot of various diseases, a lot of various skin diseases. Typically, leprosy, the major part of leprosy, we call it leprosy today, is a disease that devours your skin, your taste, your feeling. And what happens is your fingers, your digits, your body becomes so numb and so deteriorating that pieces will fall off. There are people today who talk about leprosy, and they'll have fingers that fall off, or they'll have an ear that falls off, or they'll burn themselves cooking and never realize they burned themselves because their hands are dead. They don't have no feeling there. And leprosy is a contagious disease that's passed by touching. And so what happens is when God gives the law of Moses, God says, look, if you've got someone who's got leprosy, and he tells them how to identify leprosy, in various types of leprosy, he said, you put them aside. And what do we mean put them aside? You put them in their own colony, you put them in their town, away from everybody else. And a matter of fact, when you had a leper, if you were diagnosed with leprosy, if you came into contact with someone who didn't have leprosy, it was your responsibility to stand back and say, unclean, unclean. They were supposed to be dressed where they were unkempt. They were supposed to be unkept. They were not to be dressed up, not to be like everybody else. As a sign that, hey, something's not right, that you don't need to be near me. And they would have to say, unclean, unclean, and they couldn't come in contact. Some people say that they were by the law of Moses, supposed to stay 50 feet away from anybody. And so he had this leper who is unclean, who sees Jesus and hears about Jesus. He comes and bows down, kneels down before Jesus. Again, we don't know how close he gets to Jesus, but he gets down before Jesus and he recognizes who Jesus is, because notice what he says. He doesn't say, if you can heal me, if you can make me well. He says, if you will, you can make me clean. The faith of the leper is that he knows that Jesus can heal him. He knows that Jesus can take this leprosy away if Jesus will. And so he asks, will you? And he knows verse 41, Jesus moves with pity, compassion. And this is a word we're going to see throughout the Gospels. Compassion or pity. Jesus sees his man, he feels for him, he empathizes with him. And Jesus sticks out his hand and touches him. Again, this is a man who probably hasn't been touched by an unclean person or touched by a clean person in quite a while. But yet what does Jesus do? He reaches out his hand and he touches him. And Jesus says, I will be clean. And he cleanses him. Immediately at that moment, the man is healed. The man is made right. Or not right, the man is made well. The man is made whole. And here again, we see Jesus immediately does this. Again, this is not a process. Okay, well, I've touched you. Give it about 2 weeks and it'll get better and you'll be fine. No, Jesus touched him and immediately this leprosy leaves him. And then from here, Jesus gives this man command, and this is where we're going to be finished once we get through these verses. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. But he went out and began to talk freely about it, and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter into the town, but he was out in desolate places. And people were coming to him from every quarter. So here's what Jesus does. Jesus heals the man. He says, look, you've got to go away. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to the priest, show yourself to the priest, and offer the offering that God has called. And the law of Moses told a law they're supposed to give, or an offering they were supposed to offer. If they come clean, they become healed. And he would be allowed back into society. But Jesus tells him in those first part, he says, don't tell anyone anything. Don't say anything. Don't tell anyone what I've done for you. But why? Well, notice what happens. Verse 45, the man goes out and he freely talks about it. He begins to tell everybody, hey, I was healed. Now, this is a human reaction. We may look at this man and say, but Jesus told him not to. Why won't he listen? Well, the guy's overjoyed. If you had a bad disease and all of a sudden someone heals you from it, you're going to go tell everybody. That's what this man does. He says, hey, look, I was a leper. I was unclean, but this man, this Jesus healed me. He made me whole. He made me well. And he begins to tell. And again, people begin to hear about this man. He begins to hear about Jesus. And so what they do, they want to bring all their sick people to Jesus. And again, they want to bring Jesus their sick people so that he can heal them. And the problem with that, again, is that Jesus' mission, Jesus' heavenly goal, his mission on earth, is not to heal people, but to teach the gospel. And so Jesus knows that when people know who he is and they bring nothing but sick to him, he's not going to be able to heal or teach like he wants to. And therefore, he can no longer enter the cities, because when people heard about him, hey, it's Jesus, let's go bring him the sick, let's go take him the demon-possessed. And so Jesus has to stay out in the desolate places. But notice this last part. This is how important, how powerful, and how key Jesus was, is that even though he was out in the desolate places, he was out in the desert, away from everybody, the people came to him. The people left their homes, they left their things, they came out to him for him to heal them. But not only did he heal them, he taught them. And that's the end of this chapter 1. And what I want us to see and what I want us to think about in this tonight as we finish this up, our time is over, so we've got all this, is to think about what Jesus did for this leper. To think about all the healing that Jesus has done. And this is where this was Jesus' whole purpose. His whole mission on earth was to bring the gospel, teach the good news, but also to heal. And that healing was to prove who he was. And see, that's why Mark tells us he records this gospel. That's why Luke says he records his, Matthew, John. They all record it so that we can know who Jesus is. That's the beautiful thing about the Gospels, is that they teach us about Jesus. They teach us about Jesus, a man who had compassion, a man whose mission, whose job was to come to this earth and to teach and preach the gospel, the good news of Christ, the good news about his kingdom. And he very well could have said, hey, look, I'm not here to heal. I'm just here to preach. I'm here to teach. I'm not going to do anything else. But no, Jesus is willing to do whatever it takes to heal them. Jesus is willing to do whatever it takes to make them well, to look after them, and to take care of them. Why? Because he had compassion on them. He had pity. It's the same and true what he does on the cross, isn't it? It's because of his compassion for us that he goes to the cross. That compassion he feels for lost mankind to be made right with God. And that's the beautiful thing about Christ, is to see all the great things that he did, not for his benefit, not to say, look at me, look how great I am. Matter of fact, he wanted the opposite. But he did them, he did these things for us because he had compassion. He had pity. What a great idea to think about Jesus, the one who had compassion on those people who are sick and hurting, the man who will have compassion on us if we'll turn to him and we'll listen to him. I thank you for listening tonight. I appreciate you being here. I know this is sort of an odd way of doing it. Next week, hopefully, we'll be back with our Zoom class, and we can be back in person, a little bit more personal maybe. But I do appreciate you being here and appreciate you watching this video. Again, if you have any question, any comment about anything, don't hesitate to call. Don't hesitate to text. Don't hesitate to write us. We're here anytime, me or Paula, either one. We'll talk about it. We'll figure out what we can do to help you out. I hope that you're having good with school. I hope it's going as best possible. I hope all your extra activities are going good. I know y'all are getting busy. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down and study the Bible with us. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to the time we can do this in person. But until then, we'll keep doing these video lessons. Again, thank you for being here this morning, this afternoon, whenever you watch this. I hope that you're having a good day. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you have a great week at school. And we hope to see you all soon. Until then, we hope that God blesses you.